Welcome to the Strategic Context. I'm Professor Nouriel Bremmer, and today we need to talk about something that's been eating at me for weeks. I've been watching the growing anger on America's streets, and I have to tell you, as someone who studies how empires rise and fall, what I'm seeing isn't just domestic political theater. It's the visible symptom of a much deeper structural crisis. When I see working families struggling to pay for groceries while their government spends billions on foreign interventions, when I see communities torn apart by federal enforcement operations while oil executives get new ballrooms, I see the classic signs of Imperial overstretch meeting popular resistance. This isn't about left versus right, folks. This is about a system that stopped working for regular people because it's too busy maintaining global dominance. And here's what worries me as an analyst. When empires ignore their domestic foundations while chasing foreign adventures, that's when they become vulnerable to rivals who are playing a much smarter game. Let me explain what I mean. So Trump wants Greenland. The easy way or the hard way, he says. Now, from a pure geopolitical standpoint, I understand the logic. Greenland sits on massive mineral deposits, rare earth elements that are crucial for everything from smartphones to military hardware. Climate change is opening new Arctic shipping routes. China and Russia are both expanding their Arctic presence. But here's my question. Who benefits from an expensive new territorial acquisition? The working families in Minnesota who just lost federal funding, the parents who can't afford childcare, the communities facing federal enforcement raids, or the defense contractors, the mining companies, the same corporate interests that have been profiting from American militarism for decades. Because let's be honest about what Greenland expansion means in practice. It means more military bases, more defense spending, more resources diverted from domestic needs to maintain Arctic dominance. And here's the geopolitical irony. While America talks about invading Greenland, China is quietly buying up lithium mines in Africa, building ports in South America, investing in infrastructure that actually helps people's daily lives. Beijing doesn't need to invade anyone. They just write checks and build things people want. Now let's talk about Venezuela, because this is where the disconnect becomes crystal clear. I'm watching oil executives meet at the White House talking about new ballrooms they need to plan resource extraction. Meanwhile, American families are paying through the nose for gasoline and heating bills. The logic is supposed to be simple. Control Venezuelan oil, bring down energy costs for Americans. But look at the track record. How did Iraq work out for American gas prices? How about Libya? Syria. Every time America intervenes to secure energy resources, somehow those resources never seem to translate into relief at the pump for working families. You know why? Because these operations aren't designed to help regular Americans. They're designed to help energy companies secure profitable extraction deals. And here's the brutal geopolitical math. While America spends billions on military operations to control oil, countries like Norway, Qatar, and even Russia are making money by simply selling energy to the highest bidder. Venezuela could be selling oil to American refineries tomorrow if Washington focused on trade instead of regime change. But that wouldn't generate defense contracts or give oil executives the kind of sweetheart deals they get from client governments. What's happening in Minnesota right now isn't just about immigration enforcement. It's about something much bigger, the breakdown of federal legitimacy. When you cut federal funding to blue states while launching enforcement raids, when you punish communities for resisting your policies, you're not governing anymore, you're occupying. And from a structural perspective, this is incredibly dangerous for American power globally. Think about it. How can America lecture other countries about democracy and rule of law when its own federal system is fracturing? How can you project stability abroad when you're in a low-level civil conflict at home? China's watching this. Russia's watching this. They're seeing exactly what I'm seeing. An empire that's turned its governance tools into weapons against its own citizens. And they're thinking, why would anyone want to be junior partner to a system that treats its own people this way? This is how hegemonic powers lose soft power. not through military defeat, but through moral bankruptcy. Here's what really gets to me as someone who studies power structures. We're living through a class war disguised as a culture war. While working Americans struggle with inflation, housing costs, healthcare bills, their tax dollars fund ballrooms for oil executives, enforcement operations that tear families apart, and military adventures that benefit defense contractors. The cabinet officials are partying in Vegas while their policies create suffering in American communities. This isn't sustainable, folks. Not economically, not politically, not morally. And it's definitely not sustainable geopolitically, because rival powers are offering the rest of the world a very different model. When China invests in infrastructure projects, those projects actually provide electricity, transportation, communication services that improve people's lives. When America projects power globally, it often means military bases, sanctions, enforcement operations that make life harder for regular people. Which model do you think the global South finds more appealing? Now, I want to talk about the resistance we're seeing because this is crucial for understanding where American power is heading. When NBA teams hold moments of silence for shooting victims, when musicians speak out against federal enforcement, when entire communities refuse to cooperate with federal authorities, you're witnessing a legitimacy crisis in real time. This isn't just opposition politics. This is active non-compliance with federal authority by major cultural institutions. And here's what worries me from a geopolitical standpoint. Loss of domestic legitimacy translates directly into loss of international credibility. How can America lead a rules-based international order when significant portions of its own population view their government as illegitimate? How can you build international coalitions when your own cultural leaders are actively opposing your policies? This is exactly the kind of internal weakness that rival powers exploit in their propaganda and diplomacy. Beijing and Moscow are watching this American internal crisis with great interest. Every video of federal enforcement operations, every story about cutting social services while funding military adventures, every example of working families suffering while elites profit, it all becomes propaganda material for rival powers. China doesn't need to invade Taiwan when it can point to American cities and say, "Is this the democracy you want us to copy?" Russia doesn't need to threaten Europe when it can point to federal-state conflicts in America and say, "Is this the stability you want to depend on?" This is how soft power works in reverse. America's domestic dysfunction becomes other countries' diplomatic advantage. And the terrible irony is that the more resources America spends on external power projection, the more internal dysfunction it creates, which weakens its external credibility, which requires more power projection to compensate. It's a vicious cycle that ends with imperial exhaustion. Here's what frustrates me most. This crisis is completely avoidable. America has the resources to be a global power and take care of its own people. The problem is priorities. Look at countries that actually serve their populations. Norway, Denmark, even China in its domestic policies. They invest in infrastructure, education, healthcare, social services that make citizens' lives better. They don't need to suppress domestic opposition because their governments actually deliver for their people. This is the model the rest of the world is increasingly choosing. Governance that serves populations rather than corporate interests. And it's working. These countries have higher living standards, more social cohesion, more international respect than America does right now. America could choose this path tomorrow. Use some of that defense budget for healthcare, some of those enforcement resources for education, some of those corporate subsidies for infrastructure. But that would require admitting that the current system isn't working for the American people. History teaches us something very clear about empires. They don't fall to foreign enemies. They fall when they stop serving their own people. Rome fell because it became a system that enriched elites while impoverishing citizens. Britain lost its empire when it could no longer justify imperial costs to domestic voters. The Soviet Union collapsed when its people realized the system wasn't delivering on its promises. America is approaching that same crossroads. The question is whether it chooses imperial decline or democratic renewal, because you can't have both indefinitely. You can't maintain global dominance while your own citizens suffer and rebel. Eventually, you have to choose, serve the people or serve the empire. And if you choose the empire, the people will eventually choose someone else. So where does this leave us? I see in America at a crossroads. One path leads toward more internal conflict, more imperial overstretch, more legitimacy crisis, more international isolation. The other path leads toward prioritizing domestic renewal, building systems that serve people, regaining moral authority through actual democratic governance. The geopolitical stakes couldn't be higher. China and Russia are betting that America will choose the first path, that it will exhaust itself trying to maintain dominance while neglecting its people. If they're right, American hegemony ends not with military defeat, but with moral bankruptcy. If they're wrong, if America chooses to put its people first, then the competition for global influence becomes much more interesting. Because a country that actually delivers for its citizens, that builds rather than destroys, that cooperates rather than dominates, that's a country people want to partner with. That's the America the world is waiting to see again. The question is whether it will emerge before it's too late. This is Professor Nouriel Bremmer for the Strategic Context. The choice is ours to make, and the clock is ticking.